Amen. If you will, go ahead and find your way to John chapter 8, the Gospel of John chapter 8. As you know, this week is the final week in our series, Rediscovering Jesus. For 8 weeks and a few different speakers mixed in, we've asked the question, who is Jesus? Well, I hope after 8 weeks, hopefully not painful weeks, but after 8 weeks, you're a little bit closer to answering that question for yourself. Who is Jesus? The first week we saw that Jesus is the bread of life, right? The Israelites got manna sent from heaven in the wilderness, but that does not compare to the bread of life, Jesus, who came from heaven to save us. Then we saw that He is the light of the world, the one who extinguishes darkness, right? Good news. If you look around, there needs to be some extinguishing. I am so thankful for Jesus. So thankful for Jesus. Then we saw that He is the gate, that He opens the way for us to live in green pastures, to have life abundantly and eternally. Then we saw that Jesus is the good shepherd who lays His life down for the sheep. We took communion that Sunday. What a sweet, sweet time. Then we saw that Jesus is the vine. The vine, that He is the source of our life. He is the only hope for us, really producing some long-lasting fruit. And now we are at the last I am statement, or rather, the I am statement in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. And so to kind of set the stage, early John chapter 8, we see Jesus' I am statement of I am the light of the world in verse 12, right? We see Him tell the crowd, hey, I'm not just some dude, I am the light of the world, and anybody who believes in me will have life and live forever. Pretty big stuff. Well, then He continues this conversation. He continues talking to the crowd. He continues making some audacious claims, like, I'll give you life, I'll set you free from sin, I'll do all these things. And there's a question that we've been asking for 8 weeks that's being asked in this crowd. The question is, who is this guy? Who is He? Or who does He think He is to make these claims? And so people, John chapter 8, are trying to figure out who Jesus is. They even say some pretty nasty things to Jesus. And that's where we find ourselves. John chapter 8, verse 48. Jesus makes some claims. Verse 48. The Jews responded to Him, aren't we right in saying that you're a Samaritan and have a demon? Verse 49, Jesus responds, I do not have a demon, Jesus answered. On the contrary. So let's just take a moment to see how big of a gentleman Jesus is, right? Somebody calls you a Samaritan and a demon, you're going to karate chop him. Jesus doesn't. He's going to get to something huge that He wants some to hear. Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? I do not have a demon, Jesus answered. On the contrary, I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it and judges. Truly I tell you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. There's one of those claims. Then the Jews said, now we know you have a demon. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. You say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham who died? And the prophets who died? Who do you claim to be? Verse 54. If I glorify myself, Jesus answered, my glory is nothing. My Father, about whom you say He is our God, He is the one who glorifies me. You do not know Him, but I know Him. If I were to say I don't know Him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know Him, and I keep His word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. The Jews replied, you aren't 50 years old yet, and you've seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, and here's where the rubber meets the road. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. And if that doesn't sound like correct English grammar, you are correct. But Jesus was making a point. Verse 58 again, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at Him, but Jesus was hidden and went out to the temple. Let me ask you a question real quick. Has anybody ever said anything that stopped you in your tracks? Anybody ever hurled some words at you and you think, oh, no, you didn't? Right? I just went full white girl status. You're welcome for that. Anybody ever said something bold to you and it just kind of blew you away, took your breath, shot you, and you had to stop and think, wait, well, what did he just say? What did she just say? I remember like it was yesterday. It was a moment where it was early in our relationship when I still thought that we might be friends. And Tim Alexander told me that professional wrestling was fake. No! I'm about to say some Jesus stuff to you right now. All right? Is it right that you're a... No, I'm just kidding. Anyway. Has anybody ever done that? Said something to you like, nah, that's not right. Or have they said something to you? Here's something a little bit different. Have they said something to you that made you rethink everything that you had ever thought? Made you question everything? Well, that's what we see Jesus do here in John chapter 8, especially in chapter 8, verse 58, when he says, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. He makes a huge statement, a ginormous statement that results in people trying to throw rocks at him until his death. Right? He makes a huge statement. He makes a big deal. Before Abraham was, I am. Big idea for today, by the way, is Jesus is the I am. Before Abraham was, I am. When Jesus makes this statement, the crowd is appalled. They are shocked. They have to take a step back. Jesus makes a very, very similar statement later in Scripture when he's in the garden with his disciples. And one of his disciples, who was an imposter, this guy named Judas, betrays him. And these big, tough guards come to get Jesus, right? And they're going to take him off, and they're going to beat him. They're going to put a crown of thorns on his head. They're going to put him on a criminal's cross. And he's going to raise 3 days later, right? But these big, strong soldiers come to take Jesus. They say, where is Jesus? And Jesus says, I am. And these big, strong soldiers fall to their faces. This is a huge statement. This is not a misprint. This is not a missay. This is not a mistake. Jesus was making a statement. Before Abraham was, I am. What was Jesus claiming? Why was the crowd so shocked? Why did they attempt to take his life? Why did the soldiers who were to stand tall in strength fall to their faces before Jesus? What was this such a big deal? Well, to explain, we have to go all the way back to the Old Testament. By the way, the Old Testament and the New Testament are about Jesus. But to find out what Jesus is talking about here, we've got to go all the way back to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. There's this dude named Moses. And Moses is a knucklehead, but God in His grace wants to use Moses. Right? Any knuckleheads say, that's good. It's good. He wants to use this knucklehead named Moses, and Moses is making up all kinds of excuses. And he says, I can't go to your people, right? Because he's going to use Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery. And he says, God, I can't do that. I can't talk. I'm a stutterer. And God rebuts that. It gives him a reason why that's okay. And a whole bunch of other excuses. And then one thing Moses says is but God, who do I say that you are? When I go to them, what name do I give them? Blank sent me to tell you. Like, what's your name, God? God responds in Exodus chapter 3. It's going to be up here on the screen. God responds in Exodus chapter 3, verses 14 through 15. God replied to Moses, I am who I am. I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am sent me to you. Does that sound familiar? Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And God says to Moses, hey, when you see the Israelites, you tell them, I am has sent me to you. In case there's any confusion, God continues. God also said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you, and this is my name forever. This is something that the Jews, the Israelites, should have remembered, and it's something that the soldiers did remember, and it's something that this crowd remembered. Remember, this is my name forever. This is how I'm to be remembered in every generation. So when Jesus makes this statement, I am, before Abraham, I am, Jesus is claiming to be God. Jesus is saying, I'm the God of your ancestors. Before Abraham, I am. I'm the one. I am 100% man, but I'm also 100% God. God in the flesh before men. This is why the crowd was appalled. This is why they tried to stone him, and this is why soldiers crumbled before him. Because he is the I am. All the way back in Exodus chapter 3. This explains some stuff. People who had been asking who is Jesus for a while, not like we've been asking who is Jesus for a while. They've been asking who is Jesus? Who is Jesus, right? Jesus meets the disciples on a stormy sea. He walks across the water. The disciples are in a boat. He walks across the water, steps in the boat with them, and tells the storm to sit down and be quiet. What does the storm do? Sits down and it's quiet. What do the disciples ask? Who is this man? Who is this guy? This explains some stuff. John 8:58 explains a whole lot of stuff. Jesus walked on water and calmed storms. Normal men can't do that. Normal men can't cast out thousands of demons. But Jesus did that. Normal men do not heal lepers. Normal men do not make the lame get up and run. Normal men, normal women do not give sight to the blind. But Jesus does. And so Jesus explains in John 8:58. By the way, normal men don't say to dead men that have been 4 days dead, come out of the tomb and they answer. By the way, normal men don't undergo the most excruciating death in human history, hang on a cross for 6 hours, beaten beyond his mother's recognition, be placed in a criminal's or a rich man's tomb with a heavy stone rolled in the way, and then by himself wake up 3 days later and walk out. John 8:58 answers a whole lot of questions about Jesus. He is the I am, not creature, but creator. Jesus is the great I am. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus connects himself to Exodus 3. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Hear me this morning. Jesus is God. In view of this reality, we need to ask ourselves 3 questions about our relationship with Jesus. In view of the real identity of Jesus, in view of Jesus being God, there are 3 questions that we have to ask. And I'm not going to lie to you and say there are 3 brief questions. I'm going to say it correctly. There are 3 questions. The first one is, do I recognize his authority? In view of Jesus being God, we must ask, do I recognize his authority? This passage is all about the authority of Jesus. That's what it's about. He's made some audacious claims. I'm the light of the world. I will give you light in life. Jesus claims that, and hear this, if your cousin shows up at the family reunion and says this, you can laugh him off. Not Jesus, though. Jesus brings that big back. He says, I am from above, and you are from below. Jesus says in John chapter 8 that he has come from the Father, that he is not of this world. In Jesus, also in John chapter 8, points himself to an ability to forgive sins, which, by the way, only belongs to God. He makes some audacious, out of this world claims, and this forces the people to ask questions. It forces people to question Jesus' authority. So Jesus makes some of those claims, and in verse 25, they ask a question. They ask straight out to Jesus, who are you? They ask a very similar question in verse 53 that we read. They question his authority. Verse 53, they say, "Are you greater than our father Abraham? Are you greater than the prophets who died?" And here it is, "Who do you claim to be?" And Jesus claims throughout John chapter 8, the crowd is really asking, "Who do you think that you are?" This is all about Jesus' authority. Does Jesus do or not, does he have the authority or not have the authority to say these things, to make these claims? Can he back them up? Some in this crowd would believe. It says in John chapter 8 that many there believed. But we see by the attempted rock throwing that many of them did not believe. Some of them would recognize his authority as the one true living God, and others would reject, deny his authority as the one true living God. But take a listen to some other guys that recognize Jesus' big A authority. A prophet named Isaiah, who wrote and prophesied 800 years earlier, 800 years before Jesus, wrote about Jesus, saying he would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Isaiah, 800 years earlier, recognized the big A authority of Jesus. In John chapter 1, John the Beloved writes, introduces us to Jesus, and he calls Jesus the Word. Everybody say the Word. The Word. He calls Jesus the Word, and he recognizes again Jesus' big A authority, saying, in the beginning, before all of this, before Abraham, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. 2 verses later, John Blow continues and says, all things were created through Jesus. All things were created, all things were made through the Word. One more, the disciple Thomas. Maybe you know about disciple Thomas. After the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, the other disciples tell doubting Thomas, that's not a good nickname, they tell doubting Thomas, hey, doubting Thomas, Jesus is raised, he's alive, he's come back from the dead. And doubting Thomas says, nah, not until I put my fingers in the holes in his hands and stick my hand in his side, which is kind of weird. But that's what doubting Thomas said. I won't believe. I won't believe. Well, guess what? Jesus appears to doubting Thomas. And guess what doubting Thomas does? Doubting Thomas puts his fingers in his hands, and he puts his hand in his side. And what does doubting Thomas say about Jesus then? He affirms his big A authority by calling Jesus my Lord and my God. They recognize the authority of Jesus. This morning, do you recognize the authority of Jesus? Would you ask yourself this morning, in view of Jesus' true identity as God, the great I am, would I ask myself this morning, do I recognize the authority of Jesus? Men, are you the king of your house, or is Jesus the king of your house? By the way, if you got to roam around your house saying, I'm the king of this house, or I'm the man of the house, you ain't the king of the house. Or is Jesus the king of your house? Wives, is it you or your husband that wears the pants in your relationship? Trick question. It should be neither. It should be Jesus. Do you recognize Jesus' authority? Do you believe it? And do you behave like it? Because what we believe determines how we behave. So if I really believe in Jesus' authority, if I really believe that Jesus is the Son of God, I'm going to behave like Jesus is the Son of God. If I believe that He has all authority, then I'm going to behave like He has all authority. Hear me. If we believe Jesus is the God of the universe, then He will become the God of our lives. Is He the God of your life? Or is something else sitting on the throne of your heart? Hear me, transformation. If we really recognize that Jesus is the Creator, the cosmic King, then we will recognize Him as the King of our lives. If we really do believe that Jesus is who He says He is, then our lives will sing, all hail the power of Jesus' name. and I'm His, but it does not reflect, then somebody's telling and believing a lie, and both of those people are us. You say, Seth, this feels a little bit different than most Sundays. Well, here's the deal. I believe Satan lies just like you do. And for some reason, I try to operate like my authority is bigger than Jesus' authority. Like when Jesus tells me to do something, I act like we're going to have a discussion, like it's up for debate. And I've got to ask, man, do I really recognize the authority of Jesus in my life? Do I really believe it? And if I really believe it, why don't I behave like it? Are you recognizing the authority of Jesus today? Does He have the keys to your life? Does He get the final say? Does He determine what you do with your time, your talents, and your treasures? By the way, I said time and not Tom. Does He get the final say when it comes to that stuff? If you recognize His authority in your life, He will. He will. He will. First question we need to ask in view of Jesus being God is, do I recognize His authority? The second question I need to ask in view of Jesus being God is, do I respond to Him worshipfully? Do I respond to Him worshipfully? Do I respond to Him worshipfully? Jesus says in John chapter 8, verse 58, again, before Abraham was, I am. When somebody claims to be God, they're either God or a liar. Statements like this do not allow us to remain neutral. A few weeks ago, we talked about the imaginary fence that we sit on when it comes to Jesus. It's imaginary because there's not a fence to sit on when it comes to Jesus. There's no neutral. There's no middle ground. There's either Team Jesus or Team not Jesus. And so here, after verse 58, the people are forced into a situation where they've got to respond. Do they believe? Do they recognize? Or do they reject and deny? What did they do? Verse 59. So they picked up stones to throw at Him. But Jesus was hidden and went out to the temple. How do they respond to Jesus' claim that He is God? They reject and they deny. At least some of them. The crowd refused to recognize Jesus' authority and respond in worship, because they pick up stones to throw at Jesus. But what they don't know is what Jesus would go on to say in Luke chapter 19. Jesus would look at a crowd very similar to this and say, listen, if you don't worship, if they don't worship, the rocks, the stones will cry out and worship me. And so even though these people wouldn't respond to Jesus in worship, would you know something today? Even if we don't, stones will. So would we respond in worship? Would we not be out-worshipped by stones? Would we respond to Jesus worshipfully? Jesus made the rocks and they cry out to Jesus. Jesus made us, so we ought to cry out to Jesus. Jesus is worthy of our worship. Jesus is worthy of our worship. Question. Do you respond to Jesus worshipfully? And by the way, worship is not secluded to a 5-song set list one day a week. Worship is a way of life. The Apostle Paul would write to the Roman church, Romans chapter 7. He would urge them, he would beg them, he would beseech them. Fancy word. He said, I urge you, my brethren, I urge you, my brothers and sisters, to give your bodies as living sacrifices to God. And guess what he says then? This is your reasonable act of worship. This is your reasonable act of service. This is your reasonable act of worship. Jesus is worthy of our worship, and that includes every square inch of our life. So this is how we might ask this question if we respond to Jesus in worship or not. Here it is. Does my passion belong to Jesus? What am I most passionate about? Is it Jesus? Because ain't nobody else D-I-M. Does my passion belong to Jesus? Does my heart beat fast for Jesus? Is Jesus my joy? Is Jesus my celebration? Is Jesus my song? Do I really believe that Jesus is the best thing about me? Christians, by the way, He is. Or is Jesus just something that I might pretend to do on Sunday? Is Jesus the love of my life? Or am I treating Jesus like some sort of side chick? If you're a millennial, you know what I'm talking about. Do I live for Jesus? Or is He just a dusty Bible on my nightstand? By the way, if Jesus is my life, I'm going to want to know life. Is Jesus at the center? Hear this. Is Jesus at the center of my life, or is He just an interchangeable accessory to my life? I'll say that again. Is Jesus at the center of my life? Is He my life, or is He just an interchangeable accessory to my life? Too often I treat Jesus like a keychain, and I don't carry a keychain. Is He my deepest desire? Or is He easily forgotten when something better comes up? Do I respond to Jesus in worship? Do I respond to Jesus worshipfully? Many in the crowd were okay with Jesus being an awesome teacher or a guy that does cool tricks. Many in the crowd, this crowd in John chapter 8, were okay with Jesus as long as He was feeding 5,000s and waking little dead girls up from the dead, right? They were okay with that Jesus until they come close to realizing that He's worthy of much more than that. He's worthy of their entire lives, that He's worthy of their hearts. They were okay with Jesus until they realized that Jesus was demanding everything from them. One great theologian would say, Christ bids us, come and die. They were on Team Jesus until they realized Team Jesus is about Team Jesus. But hear me, guilt does not bring us to a place of worship. All does. Guilt does not bring us to a place of worship. Wonder does. A preacher yelling at you for 45, 50 minutes does not provoke worship. Being captivated by the love of Jesus does that. So listen to some things about Jesus this morning. This is Jesus. Jesus, the bread of life, who satisfies forever. This is Jesus, the light of the world that extinguishes all darkness. This is Jesus, the gate to life abundantly and life eternally. This is Jesus, the good shepherd who lays down His life for the sheep. Yes, the one who lays His life down for us. This is Jesus, the resurrection and the life, the one who makes dead people come alive. This is Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. The only way, the only one who can really introduce us to God. This is Jesus, the vine, who is the source of our life and the one who produces long-lasting, eternal fruit in us. This is Jesus. Jesus, the I am, existing, creating, and sustaining forever. This is Jesus, and He is worthy of our worship. This morning, are we responding to Jesus worshipfully? Are we responding to Jesus worshipfully? Because He is worthy of our hearts and He is worthy of our lives. If this is Jesus, we must ask, do I respond to Him worshipfully? Does He have my heart? Does He have my life? One last question. If you answered no to either of those questions, there's another question you need to ask yourself. If you answered no to either one of those questions, there's another question that you need to ask yourself. And that is, do I receive Him eternally? Do I recognize His authority? Do I respond to Him worshipfully? And do I receive Him eternally? We've already touched on a few of them, but throughout John chapter 8, Jesus makes some eternal promises. I don't know about you, but I can't make too many promises and keep them. And so when Jesus makes eternal promises, we need to ask, well, can you back that up? Right? One of His eternal promises, verse 51, truly I tell you, here's an eternal promise. Truly I tell you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. This is an eternal promise. But Jesus, being eternal, can make and keep eternal promises. We know that Jesus is eternal because of what He says in verse 58, before Abraham was. Before Abraham was. We're talking about thousands of years. Before Abraham was. And the crowd even says, hey, you're not even 50 years old. Jesus is making a claim that He is eternal. And if He is eternal, He can make and keep eternal promises. While Jesus was born, right? We all know the Christmas story. While Jesus was born, Jesus was not created. While Jesus was born, Jesus was not created. Jesus existed long before His due date in that baby in a manger. He was born, but not created. Jesus is actually all the way back in the creation story. If you were to look back, and we're not going to journey back, but I encourage you to jot this note and go look back this afternoon. If you look all the way back to the creation story in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:26, God says something very, very curious that makes sense when you read John 8:58. He's making man, and this is what He says. Let us make man in our image. Let us make man in our image. What we see in Genesis 1:26 is Father, Son, and Spirit. The Trinity. Existing perfectly in unity for all eternity. And so Jesus, existing beautifully, perfectly, with God and the Spirit, all eternity, can make and keep eternal promises. This makes sense of what Paul writes in Colossians 1:16 when he writes, everything was created by Him. Jesus, everything was created by Jesus. In heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. Jesus is eternal. Therefore, it can make and keep eternal promises. Jesus existed, yes, before Abraham, but yes, even before the first man, Adam. Jesus is eternal. And He gives us an eternal opportunity. Jesus is eternal and gives us an eternal opportunity. Come ahead, Tim. Jesus is eternal and gives us an eternal opportunity. This is why we must ask the question, do I receive Him eternally? Because He gives us an eternal opportunity to know God and be in relationship with Him. He gives us an eternal opportunity to receive Him, not just as another teacher or religious icon, but as the way to life abundantly and life eternally. Jesus gives us an eternal opportunity. You say, Seth, why are we so crazy about Jesus around here? Like, oh, songs we sing about Jesus. Every Sunday you talk about Jesus. When are you going to talk about money and finances and marriage and all the fun stuff? When are you going to talk about that? It's coming. That stuff is useless without Jesus. Because none of those things give us eternal opportunity. I don't care how good of an investor you are. It does not give us eternal opportunity. But Jesus does. This is why we're so crazy about Jesus around here. Because Jesus, this perfect eternal being who exists in perfect unity, who is one with the Father and the Spirit, stepped into our world and died for our sin, rising from the dead 3 days later, so that we may live and be one with Him forever. Now say that kind of fast. What I say? This perfect eternal being stepped stepped out of heaven and into our world so that we might know and be in relationships with one true living God. The problem with that is we can't know the one true living God in full relationship without somebody paying for our sins. And guess what? Jesus being God did that too on a cross for you. And so this morning, would you recognize His authority? Jesus, there's none but you. Have your say in my life. Today, would you say, Jesus, I'm going to respond worshipfully. You have my heart. You have my life. You have my passion. You have my joy. You have my time. You have all that I am. And Jesus, I receive you eternally. Thank you, one true living God, for stepping into our world, the world that you made and dying for us. Today, would you say this? If you're not there yet, would you say, Jesus, I believe. I believe you. I believe your claims. I believe in you. I believe that you are the one true Son of God who came into the world to save sinners. I believe in you, Jesus. And I need you, Jesus. I want to take advantage of that eternal opportunity. I want to know you. I want you to be my Savior. I want you to be my Lord. I want my life to be yours. Jesus, would you save me? Would you make me new? Would you wash me clean? You are worthy. You get the final say. I need you. Today, if that's you, I want you to know that I'm going to be down here and we're going to have other people that are here to pray for you. We've got people in Transformation Church that if you need to ask questions, if you're confused about what next step is, what you do with this, how do you respond to His authority, how do you respond worshipfully, how do you receive Him eternally? If you've got questions about that, find me or find Pastor Tim or find somebody in a TC shirt. We would love to talk with you about what God's doing in your life. But this morning, would we recognize that Jesus is the one? Jesus is the great I am, and He's worthy of us.